Shaloo Shabra, 12 days. Richard I was King of England and one of the most recognized military commanders of the Crusades. In March of 1199, he was not fighting in the Holy Land. He was in the Limousin region of France, besieging a minor castle called Shaloo Shabra. The siege was unremarkable. The castle was small. Its garrison was thin. On the evening of March 26th, Richard rode out to observe the fortifications without wearing full armor. A lone crossbowman on the castle wall released a bolt. It struck Richard in the left shoulder. The wound was treated, but in the days that followed, it became infected. According to contemporary chronicles, including the account of Roger of Hatton, gangrene set in. Surgeons attempted to remove the bolt and treat the wound, but the infection had spread too far. Richard lingered for 12 days. By the time his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, arrived at his bedside, there was nothing more to be done. He died on April 6, 1199. Contemporary chronicles record that before he died, Richard asked for the crossbowman to be brought before him. The man, identified in some accounts as Pierre Bazile, reportedly said he had fired the bolt because Richard had killed his father and his brothers. According to the same accounts, Richard forgave him and ordered him released. After Richard's death, those orders were not carried out. Mercenaries in the camp had the crossbowman game overed. Richard's body was divided according to the customs of the period. His heart was sent to Rouen. His entrails were buried at Chalus. His body was interred at Fontevraud Abbey in Anjou beside his father. Drowning at Salah, Frederick I, Holy Roman Emperor, was the most powerful ruler in Europe when he set out on the Third Crusade in 1189. He led the largest Christian army assembled for any crusade, tens of thousands of soldiers marching overland through the Balkans and into Anatolia. By June of 1190, the army had crossed much of southern Anatolia and reached the Salaf River near the town of Silifke. The river crossing stood between Frederick and the remaining march toward the Holy Land. On June 10th, Frederick entered the river. What happened next is disputed across the sources that documented it. Some accounts describe his horse throwing him mid-crossing. Others suggest he had gone to bathe or swim across separately from the main crossing. The Muslim chronicler Ibn al-Athir noted that the water at the crossing point was reportedly shallow. No single account provides a complete picture, and contemporary sources do not agree on the precise circumstances. What the sources agree on is the outcome. Frederick drowned. He was pulled from the water, but he could not be revived. The Holy Roman Emperor was dead before his army reached the Crusader states. The consequences followed immediately. The German Crusader force, which had been the largest single army of the entire campaign, largely dissolved. Some soldiers turned back toward Europe. Others continued by sea in reduced numbers. The force that had set out as the most formidable component of the Third Crusade never arrived intact in the Holy Land. Frederick's body was preserved for transport. According to chronicles of the period, his bones were carried forward to Antioch, where they were buried. The army he had led across a continent had effectively ceased to exist at the riverbank, where he died. Plague at Antioch. Adhemar of Le Puy was a French bishop appointed by Pope Urban II as the papal legate of the First Crusade. His role was both spiritual and practical. He served as the senior religious authority on the campaign and as a mediator among the Crusader nobles, who frequently quarreled over strategy, supplies, and authority. By the summer of 1098, the First Crusade had achieved its most significant victory to date. After a grueling siege lasting nearly 8 months, the Crusader army had taken Antioch in June. It was a turning point. Jerusalem, the ultimate destination, was still ahead, but the army had broken through one of the most fortified cities in the region. What followed the victory was not celebration. The army remained inside Antioch through the summer, and conditions inside the city deteriorated. Food was scarce. The summer heat was severe. A disease outbreak moved through the Crusader camp. The Gesta Francorum, one of the primary contemporary accounts of the First Crusade, documents that Adhemar died on August 1st, 1098, during this outbreak. The exact nature of the illness is not specified in the sources. He died in Antioch, weeks after the city had fallen. His death removed the one figure who held consistent authority across the divided Crusader leadership. He had not been a military commander, but he had been the common point of reference for nobles who trusted no one else. The Gesta Francorum and other contemporary chronicles note his passing as a significant loss to the campaign. The Crusader army remained at Antioch for several more months before resuming the march toward Jerusalem. They arrived at the city's walls in June of 1099, nearly a year after Adhemar had died. Jerusalem, 1 year. Godfrey of Bouillon led the final assault on Jerusalem in July of 1099. When the city fell, he was offered the title of king. He declined it, accepting instead the designation of Advocate of the Holy Sepulchre. He was the first Latin ruler of the city the Crusaders had spent 3 years fighting to reach. He had ruled for less than a year when he fell ill. In June of 1100, Godfrey traveled to Caesarea. The chronicles of Albert of Aix and Echehard of Ora both record that he became sick there. The exact nature of the illness is not specified in their accounts. Some Arabic sources from the period attributed his death to poisoning, but contemporary Christian chronicles did not support that account, and no evidence was established to confirm it. Godfrey was brought back to Jerusalem. His condition did not improve. He died in the city on July 18th, 1100, approximately 1 year and 1 week after it had been taken. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The death created an immediate problem. Godfrey had no heir. The Latin kingdom of Jerusalem was barely a year old, its borders contested, its garrison thin, and its political structure still forming. The question of who would rule next was unresolved at the moment he died. His brother Baldwin, who had established himself as Count of Edessa, was summoned. Baldwin arrived in Jerusalem later that year and was crowned the first formal king of Jerusalem on Christmas Day 1100. Godfrey had conquered the city that defined the entire crusading enterprise. He did not live to see his second year in it, died on campaign. Baldwin I was the first crowned king of Jerusalem. He had ruled and defended the Latin kingdom for 18 years, expanding its territory through repeated military campaigns along the coast and into the surrounding region. In early 1118, Baldwin led an expedition into Egypt. His forces moved into the Nile Delta and seized the town of Farama. It was an aggressive push beyond the kingdom's established borders, consistent with how Baldwin had operated throughout his reign. During the campaign, an old wound reopened. Fulcher of Chartres, a chronicler who accompanied Baldwin on his campaigns and recorded events firsthand, documented that the king's condition deteriorated at Al Arish on the Egyptian frontier. The wound had originally been sustained in 1103. The precise medical details of how it affected Baldwin during the Egypt campaign are not recorded in the available sources, but Fulcher's account makes clear the king could not recover from it. Baldwin died at Al Arish on April 2nd, 1118. His body needed to be transported back to Jerusalem. The distance and the conditions made standard burial preparation impractical. According to the chronicles of the period, his cook preserved the body in salt for the journey. The army carried him back across the desert. Baldwin arrived in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, April 7th, 1118. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, beside his brother Godfrey, who had died in the same city 18 years earlier. Baldwin left behind no direct heir. The succession question fell immediately to the nobles of the kingdom. His cousin Baldwin of Bourke was selected and crowned, becoming Baldwin II. The kingdom Baldwin I had spent nearly 2 decades building passed to another man, within days of his body reaching the city. Saladin's tent at Hatton. Reynold of Chatillon was the lord of Kerak, a castle that sat directly across one of the most traveled trade routes in the region. For years, he had used that position to raid Muslim caravans passing through, repeatedly violating the truces that held the fragile peace between the Crusader states and Saladin's forces. On one occasion, according to multiple Muslim chroniclers, a caravan carrying Saladin's sister was among those attacked. Saladin had sworn publicly to kill Reynold himself. On July 4th, 1187, the Crusader army was destroyed at the Battle of Hatton, near the Sea of Galilee. Saladin's forces had surrounded the Crusaders on a waterless plateau and dismantled them over the course of a single day. Among the prisoners taken afterward were King Guy of Lusignan and Reynold. Both men were brought to Saladin's tent. The eyewitness chronicler Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani, who was present, recorded what followed. According to his account, King Guy was offered water as a gesture of hospitality. Saladin intervened before Reynold could receive the same. Under the codes of the period, offering a prisoner water constituted a grant of protection. Saladin had no intention of extending that to Reynold. Saladin personally game-overed Reynold in the tent. Ibn al-Athir and Baha ad-Din, 2 further Muslim chroniclers who documented the events at Hatton, corroborate the account. King Guy was spared and later released. Reynold was not. The Battle of Hatton effectively ended the Crusader kingdom's military capacity. Jerusalem fell to Saladin that same year in October of 1187. The campaign that led directly to that outcome had been provoked in significant part by Reynold's years of raids and broken agreements. Tripoli after Hatton. Raymond III was the Count of Tripoli and one of the most senior lords in the Crusader states. In the months leading up to the summer of 1187, he had been among the most vocal opponents of engaging Saladin's army in open battle. When King Guy of Lusignan made the decision to march toward the horns of Hatton, Raymond argued against it. He predicted the army would be destroyed if it advanced across waterless ground toward a prepared enemy. He was correct. On July 4th, 1187, the Crusader army was encircled and dismantled at Hatton. Raymond escaped. He led a cavalry charge early in the engagement that broke through Saladin's lines and allowed him to ride clear of the battlefield. It was one of the very few escapes from a field that claimed nearly the entire Crusader military force. He rode to Tripoli. Chronicles of the period record that Raymond died later in 1187 from pleurisy, an inflammation of the lung lining. The exact timeline of his illness relative to the battle is not precisely established in the available sources. He did not recover. Whether Raymond lived long enough to learn of Jerusalem's fall in October of 1187 is not confirmed in the sources. His death closed a long factional dispute that had run through the leadership of the Crusader states for years. Raymond had represented one side of that conflict, consistently opposing King Guy's authority and military judgment. The outcome at Hatton had vindicated his position entirely. He did not survive to act on that vindication or to take part in whatever response the remaining Crusader lords might mount. He died in the city that bore his title, weeks or months after the kingdom he had tried to protect ceased to exist in any meaningful form. Tunis, 8th Crusade. Louis IX was king of France, and had already led one crusade before organizing a second. He landed his army on the North African coast near Tunis in July of 1270. The stated intention was to move from there toward Egypt and eventually the Holy Land. The army made camp outside Tunis in the middle of summer. The heat was severe. Clean water was difficult to obtain. Within weeks of landing, disease spread through the camp. Contemporary accounts by Jean de Joinville and Geoffrey of Beaulieu, both of whom documented Louis's life and campaigns, record that the army suffered heavily from the conditions. Louis fell ill. His son John Tristan, who was with him on the campaign, died from the same outbreak before his father. Louis IX died on August 25th, 1270. The cause recorded in the sources was dysentery. Centuries later, forensic analysis of his preserved jawbone suggested he may also have been suffering from scurvy at the time of his death. That finding comes from modern examination, not from the accounts of those present. His body was prepared for the journey back to Europe using a method known at the time as mos teutonicus, a process of boiling the remains to separate and preserve the bones for transport over long distances. His entrails were buried in Tunis. His heart was taken to Monreale Cathedral in Sicily. His bones were carried to Saint Denis in Paris, the traditional burial place of French kings. His death ended the 8th Crusade immediately. The army, already weakened by disease and the loss of its king, had no reason to remain. It withdrew without engaging in further military operations. Louis was canonized by Pope Boniface VIII in 1397,